David Krakauer, welcome to Beyond Stage Fright. You're known internationally as a clarinetist who not only plays classical music to the highest levels, but also klezmer and jazz and your own compositions. What I'd like to know first of all is how it feels to play in these different mediums.
Well, sometimes it's crazy because it's like having a brain transplant. I was just in Mankato, Minnesota, playing as a soloist with their orchestra there, and it was wild. Played the first half was a Mozart clarinet concerto, and then the second half was a group of klezmer pieces, and it really is. It sometimes is crazy, to try to switch gears like that. I have certain little tricks. I have a different mouthpiece for the klezmer music, the classical music. I have a certain sound I'm looking for, and then for klezmer and improvised music, I have another sound, and that's helpful. To really have these two distinct sound worlds. It's really like I'm playing two different instruments. So that gives me at least a physical sensation that I can hold on to. How the mouthpiece responds, the mouthpiece and reed, of course, together, how they respond, what kind of colors they give me, etc. So that's helpful. But it's also just it is a different mindset, and that's challenging to juggle that.
I guess it's a bit like speaking a different language, isn't it? Just sort of jumping from one to the other.
Yes, yes. In fact, I speak fairly fluent French, but it's always the first 3 days when I'm in France. I feel it's kind of like a rusty machine, and I have to oil it and get it going again. So I think that's with the musical styles. I go back and forth so quickly that it's less like that. I just snap into gear and I'm going. But it is sometimes astonishing, even to myself, that it ends up being like that.
And do the changes in those mediums, do they make any difference to how you feel in terms of managing the sort of stress around performance?
Yes, of course. I think, playing classical music is like being a tightrope walker. You have that tightrope, and you really have to play basically the notes that you're given, and the dynamics and the whole thing. I mean, when I'm improvising, I can make up the dynamics. I can make up the notes. If I go in another direction, I'll go like, oh wow, that's cool, and I just go with it. And so sometimes I think when I play classical music, I like to try to bring that spirit of improvisation into playing classical music. Bring the same spirit that I use for improvised music and for klezmer music. But it's not always easy. I think performance stress, stage fright, these things are very mysterious beasts that rear their ugly heads when you least expect it. You're like, oh, I'm not going to be nervous for this, and then suddenly you're like, it's chemical. The adrenaline rushes in, and so it's always tricky to manage that.
Is there anything particular that sort of will trigger that for you, or is it just sometimes you just simply don't know?
I simply don't know. It is. I mean, I remember once a family friend of mine was a musician who, a violinist who had played in Paris in the 1930s, then came to America, during World War II, and got into the New York Philharmonic, and had a chamber ensemble. And he always talked about it. He said, nervousness is so mysterious. You can be at Carnegie Hall and a big high-pressure concert. You don't feel a drop of, or you feel a little bit, of course. You wouldn't be human if you didn't feel a little bit. And then he said, suddenly you come to some little town in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly for some, inexplicable reason, you just get the jitters. It is mysterious. When I play klezmer or improvised music, for me it's like breathing. I don't There are times I've been a little stressed out about a certain performance or whatever. Maybe I felt like there was some, whatever, some person in the audience who was important for my career or blah, blah, blah. But basically, like when I improvise and play improvised music, it is kind of like just daily life for me. It's just like singing a song or breathing. Classical music is a little different in that way, but I think that for me, the key is as much preparation as possible. Um, uh, just when I play a hard concerto like that, I like to do 2 or 3 run-throughs in public, even if it's just I gather a group of my students and I go like, okay, listen to this, uh, or sometimes friends have a piano and go and make a party and play some music. And I think that's extremely helpful to put yourself under fire, under that, on that adrenaline bucking bronco, and feel what that feels like, because there actually is no other way to feel it than actually to put yourself under fire. I think one time, again playing the Mozart concerto, which is just so difficult because it's so exposed and so perfectly written, and the writing is so transparent and so you're just it's really really tricky. And I remember one time playing it, and I'm not the principal clarinetist of an orchestra. I'm a soloist. I also am mainly identified with klezmer music, so I don't get the opportunity to play the Mozart every day of the week. And so this was a few years ago, and I had to play the Mozart somewhere on the West Coast. And the day before the concert, I was so nervous. I mean, I was just like beside myself with just anxiety and if I was going to mess this up or mess that up. And I just said, I'm just going to play it with the music. And I put the music on the stand down at knee level. I hardly looked at it, but it really, the whole anxiety went away. It was one of the most fun performances I ever did. The secret, I think, is to have a philosophical attitude about it all. That we're not to say that this performance is the my be all end all last performance. It's a point in one's timeline, and I think we have to be good to ourselves. And I decided at that time when I was so nervous, I said, if you need to use the music, use the music. There are plenty of soloists, international soloists, who play concerti every night of the week who use the music. And is it such a horrible stain against them? No. If they need that and they're going to play better, then they should use the music. And so in that instance, I did. And then I thought to myself the second time, the music's going to be distracting. I don't want it there. I think I'm going to play better without the music. So it's always making that choice. And again, being good to ourselves. I think we all need to give ourselves a pat on the back. And even if, we do a performance that isn't quite, we have a bad day, whatever happens to everybody, we just say, okay, that's that point in the timeline. Let me use that as a learning experience. And go on from there, and not see these things as in such a black and white terms, like a horrible defeat.
Do you feel that the recording industry has had anything to do with that?
I was just about to say that. I mean, I think I have done recordings that were overproduced. And one classical recording in particular, where the whole thing was pasted together with so many takes, and the producers were that note's out of tune, or riding a particular member of the group, a string player, that note's out of tune, that note's out of tune. And I didn't think it was out of tune. And suddenly nobody could play. Nobody could play their best. And that's so... I think those kinds of things, the recording industry and this expectation of absolute perfection, and then we all become guilty of it. We sit there with Pro Tools, and we move a note to the left or to the right, and then I still go back. My favorite recordings, classical and jazz, are from the 1930s. When they went in and did 2 takes, and
they had mistakes. There were mistakes.
They had mistakes, and it sounded beautiful and human and living. And I don't think we can go back to that, unfortunately. So the best advice is go to live concerts and don't listen to recordings, because I try in my recordings just to at least to make the sound very natural, and whenever possible. But there are a lot of factors, producers, engineers, and everybody's got their opinion about how it should be. So
when you're recording, do you find that you can, even within all those restrictions and limitations of the actual production itself, do you find you can get that aliveness and that vitality that you'd have when you're on the stage?
I think we just have to trust that it's there. It doesn't feel in a recording. It's not going to feel good. I think one would be hard pressed to find anybody who would honestly say they felt as free in a recording as they did in a live performance. I think one would be extremely hard pressed to find that.
There are a lot of musicians who love to play from memory, and a lot of musicians who can't stand playing from memory and don't have any need to play from memory for whatever reason. What's your best? I mean, what would you prefer to do ideally?
I think it really does depend. I will play by memory if I feel like if something goes slightly wrong, I can get right back on. That there, and memorization. I sometimes when I initially memorized a piece like the Mozart, I memorized it in small chunks and really just sort of drove those in, and then gradually built it up into bigger pieces, and then really understanding structure. It's kind of like a hospital. A hospital always has an emergency generator. So if the power grid fails, the emergency generator kicks in so the patients won't die. And the same thing I think is true of memorization. If we have visual memorization, finger memorization, ear memorization, and then intellectual memorization, we have at least 4 things going. And everyone can have a little slip, and you play a wrong note, oops, okay, boom, and then you're back on because the other generator kicks in. One generator may fail, but so having those generators I think is really helpful. One of the most challenging experiences I ever had was I was asked to memorize Luciano Berio's Sequenza.
Wow.
Now this was, there was a whole evening of the complete sequenzas in New York City, and Berio was present, and so I was called in August, in the middle of August, and the concert was in November. I had never played the piece before. So I told them, okay, give me 1 week, I'll think about it. So I practiced it like a maniac for 1 week, and I said, okay, I'll do it. Because the stipulation was it had to be by memory, because Berio was having poetry readings in between, and he wanted to make almost a theatrical evening out of the whole thing. So that was the stipulation. If you accept this engagement, you're going to play by memory. So I worked on it for a week. I called them back. I said, yes, I'll do it. I hung up the phone. I said, what did I just do? I'm out of my mind. This is insane. But then, so I memorized it, and I had heard a student play it. That was my only experience with the piece, and I thought to myself, I hate this piece. It's awful. This piece is just 13 minutes of atonal, nonsensical, you know. But then, as I got into the piece, I began to really see the structure, and got to love it. And so when I performed it, I brought out the structure and how it all worked, a sort of exposition of a theme, and then how things go on. There's a central pitch in the middle. And what I began to do was almost write a story, so that the piece had a short story to it in a certain way. Like, basically, there's this one pitch that goes off in the Berio, and it's kind of like someone getting shock treatment. It's this very loud note, and I thought, this is really a piece about madness and about a voyage through madness. And I went through that, and every place I had a little thing, and my whole score, I've marked this theme right side up, then it moves to this. So there was a lot of intellectual memorization, because the ear memorization, because it's really atonal, was hard to do. But I would go, okay, now the pitch center is F sharp, now it's F, now it's E. Okay, I see, there's a little progression here. I would identify progression. So that was an intellectual / emotional method of memorizing that piece. And then I got to the dress rehearsal, and of course I had it memorized. And Berio met me, and I introduced myself to him, and I'd never met him, and then a couple of people hadn't memorized because there was one last-minute substitution. So he was he was kind of an irascible person, known for his temper. And so he met me, and I said, hi, my name is David Krakauer, and great to meet you. And he looks at me, and the first thing he says to me is, do you need a music stand? Very aggressive. And I said, no. And he said, oh, nice to meet you. So
no pressure there then.
That was amazing. And I remember playing it for him that time. The performance went extremely well, but even better was that dress rehearsal playing for him. And that was a moment where things flowed in this amazing way. And I couldn't believe that in that short amount of time, I was able to do that. So that was a huge triumph. And when I see my students play it, I tell them, you need to actually memorize this piece. Otherwise, you have to play it with like 5 music stands, and it comes across very academic and dry, and they really don't get the thing. They don't get the emotional core of the piece. And so that was I've never played it. That was 1995. I haven't played it since. It's interesting to do all that work for that one moment, but I've been teaching it to my various students, and one student now did it as a duet with a dancer, and it was incredible. And I said, yes, this theatrical element is so important. So many of my students have picked up that torch and have done it in that way. And so the whole experience of memorizing it and doing it was really, really wonderful for me. It was interesting that because I learned that Berio so well, in fact, he made certain comments to me after I ran through it, and I said, well, yes, I understand if you want it that way, that's fine, but what you wrote is ... And in fact, I think, I don't get as nervous playing in front of composers because I actually think that writing music and performing music, it's part of a kind of a double. Playing the music, and maybe it should be more helpful to playing, let's say, the classics, Beethoven, Mozart. I think it's more of a living situation than we make it to be in our heads. That we believe that these notes on the page are like religious, and if you slip once, the whole world, a huge chasm will open up, and the entire city of London or New York City will fall into the chasm, and everyone will die. I mean, it's really not, for me, I believe that composers write things, they have something in their head, they have a feeling, and it's a discussion. That to be an interpreter, one has to be in a discussion with a composer. Composers who get super, didactic about their music and they want you to do it exactly this way. I don't play those composers' music. I don't even want to deal with them because I think those composers are not really interested. They should just put it on a computer and forget about it. If they want it exactly that way, then they should just write electronic music. But if you are dealing with a performer, especially a performer who has a brain and a heart, then you better let that performer take the ball and run with it. And, it's trust on both sides. And the composer said, oh, I want this. My dear friend Osvaldo Golikov, he wrote The Dreams and Prayers of Isaac the Blind for klezmer, clarinet, and string quartet or string orchestra. So the idea to say klezmer clarinet means unleash all of that. Unleash the little notes between the notes, what they call the krechts, the little sobs. Unleash that whole stylistic thing, that whole way of phrasing. If you have a piece for string quartet and jazz trumpet, the player's got to play in that style. So I always say I give Osvaldo all the notes he wrote plus 30% more because it's getting into that stylistic thing. And Osvaldo is the kind of composer who knows that his interpreters are going to bring something else to the table and that the piece comes alive, maybe in a different way than he imagined. But I have all these Osvaldo had these beautiful little anecdotes that he would tell about the piece, and I have them written all over my part, too. And I'll see that, and I'll go, oh, yeah, that's Osvaldo would say that, and little things in his handwriting. And so that's the thing. It's not an absolute, like the composer, and then the performer, almost duplicates this absolute, or it's not like the composer writes something and then the performer completely ignores it. It's a conversation, and it's a living moment between a composer and a performer. My compositions are way simpler. They're lead sheets. And they're tunes, but I give them to my band, and I have very specific ideas and instructions for them, and I'll say, put this kind of beat here, or let's try this with this kind of, harmony, whatever. But at the end of the day, I work with great musicians, and they bring something amazing to the table that I didn't expect. And I think that that's what a performer should bring to a composer. The composer, wow, that never occurred to me, but that's amazing. And I think that's the sort of conversation that happens with composers, performers, with all music that makes music living.
So this whole thing that you're talking about, living music, a conversation, telling the story, not having too much of a separation between composer and performer, all of these things, would you say that, because as soon as you talk about that, it's almost as if performance stress isn't anywhere in the mix. It feels as if that's your focus is so clear and strong that nerves wouldn't be able to kind of impact somehow. Am I right?
Theoretically, you're right.
But they still kind of nudge in from time to time.
Yeah, they nudge in, and I don't know, and I'm always, like, sometimes if I feel it coming, I'll go like, nervousness is stupid. It's illogical. I'll try to chase it away that way, but it's not always obvious.
What do you do if you find that something comes in from left field in a performance when you're least expecting it? How do you actually sort of manage it at the time?
Okay, at the time, I think the key is breathing and engaging the breath. That if you feel that, it's like if you feel jittery, it's always good to sit down and breathe. So I think it's the same thing. If you feel jittery during a performance, it's like, okay, breathe and dig in more and try to feel your feet. Don't feel like you're like floating out into outer space, but feel your whole body, feel everything. Breathe down into your feet and feel integrated. I think that's the key, to not feel like suddenly you're off in some other weird zone. So yes, if nerves do creep up on you, I think it is a good idea to just keep breathing.
Do you ever suffer from what I think a lot of people suffer from, which is that sort of weird thing, I don't know whether you could count it as nerves or not, but when you sort of suddenly lose your focus and you lose your sense of the music and you're thinking about the person in the third row who's coughing, or you're wondering what you're going to have for dinner tonight, or do you manage to let, you're so focused that doesn't happen?
I think that if we can focus on the story we're telling, I think that's very important. Being present with that story. I mean, even if the person in the third row is coughing, I'll say, well, hey, this is a pleading moment. Listen to this. Something. And then they'll, I hope I can get them back, It's like if you're having a conversation, it's like someone's losing focus. Hey, where are you? Are you out to lunch today? Like, come on back.
Yeah.
What are you thinking about? Where is your mind? And I think that that's important, to stay focused with the story, and that every single note we play. I mean, for us as instrumentalists, we almost have to assign words in a way. Not words to every note, like, oh, we have a friend in Jesus, or something like that, or, something silly like that, but more like, like that very phrase in the Brahms E-flat Sonata. I say to students, if they play it sort of da 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 da. I know I'm in the wrong key. I don't have perfect pitch, but anyway, for those perfect pitchers out there, perfect pitch people, I would say to them, it's marked allegro appassionato. No, I'm sorry. No, it's not. It's marked allegro amabile. I said, if it was marked allegro appassionato, you might play or something, maybe not that schmaltzy. Or if it was marked allegro furioso, you'd play and you get that feeling. But this is marked amabile, like, come in, pasta's on the stove, So the phrase has that warmth and that friendliness, amabile, that character. And the composer gives us lots of clues from the harmonies they write, from the shape of the melody, from that kind of a marking. And so, to say, focus in, and then sometimes I like to think another trick is to breathe in the character. If you breathe in amabile, or you breathe in furioso, that gives another character. And I think focusing on those things, focusing on the story you want to tell, focusing on the character, and thinking, okay, I'm gonna go for that 100%, and the rest is being a human being. You know, if I slip, I miss a note. If I, play a wrong note, it's okay. We all feel disappointed if we do that. Again, just saying classical music now, but still, it's like the rest is being a human. If we can get up there and tell the story, that's a successful performance.
And what does it feel like to you when it really goes well and you're right there and you feel that you're just loving what you're doing and it's all working? What does it feel like?
Oh, it's exhilarating. It's absolutely exhilarating. And I mean, I think that sometimes, for example, with my band, and I feel like everything is going right and we're communicating, I'm like, yeah, we have good conditions. All we need are good conditions. We have, with my band, it's a little different because we play with stage monitors because we're amplified. So I'll go like, yeah, the stage monitors are in good condition. We have good microphones. We are close enough together to hear each other. Nothing's going wrong. The sound technicians are doing their job. Everything is good. Where we have that potential to play really, really, really well together when we have good conditions. And I think it's, that when you have good conditions, you come in. I always play better if my colleagues really, really play well. And we all find ourselves in situations where, whatever, maybe maybe people aren't as committed or something. And so what I try to do in those kinds of situations is to try to impart my feelings, not be shy. Like if you go like, oh, this orchestra, for example, I'm playing with an orchestra and they seem a little bored or something, because it's a hard job, and I sympathize with orchestra players, and day in and day out, I say I have to give them as much of my spirit as I can. I like to do the first rehearsal facing the orchestra, and not to be didactic, like, wake up, or something like that, but more like, here it is, I'm sharing with you, so whatever we can do, we have to take responsibility to make the best conditions for ourselves, and sometimes that's out of our control. But if we can make really good conditions and get that flow of communication and flow of good feeling, I think that's the best we can do. And again, give ourselves a pat on the back and say we did our best and it went as well as we could. But when you can get that fire burning and those sparks flying, that's when it goes, that's when it's exhilarating and it goes really well. So we have to all, we all have to take 100% responsibility to do our best to see what happens and make sure that we can get as good a situation as we possibly can.
David Krakauer, thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much.